My mother poisoned my mother-in-law at my wedding anniversary lunch, looked me in the eyes and said, "She was stealing you from me. I don't share my daughter with anyone." The sharp, desperate scream of my mother-in-law, Rosa, echoed through the dining room as she brought her trembling hands to her neck. Her normally warm brown eyes now wide with pure terror as she desperately tried to breathe through a throat that was progressively closing as if invisible hands were strangling her from inside. And it was at that exact moment, at 2:43 on a Sunday afternoon that should have been perfect, that my carefully balanced 42-year-old life between two families who pretended to tolerate each other completely collapsed before my horrified eyes. The table was impeccably arranged with the white linen tablecloth that had been Rosa's own wedding gift 15 years ago, the fine porcelain plates that Helena had insisted on bringing from her house because she considered mine inadequate for a special occasion. And in the center, majestically sat the chocolate cake with strawberry frosting that I had specially ordered from the most expensive bakery in town in a desperate attempt to simultaneously please two women who had been silently competing for my attention and affection since the day Roberto had placed a ring on my finger. The sound of Rosa's body hitting the marble floor when she collapsed from the chair was immediately followed by the hysterical screams of Roberto, who rushed to support his mother as she violently convulsed, white foam escaping from the corners of her mouth in a scene that seemed taken directly from a medieval nightmare about demonic possessions. But that was terribly real, and was happening in my own home, during a celebration I had planned for weeks to finally bring together harmoniously the two most important women in my adult life. Helena remained seated in her chair with a disturbing immobility that dramatically contrasted with the chaos unfolding around her. Her piercing blue eyes fixed on Rosa's convulsing body with an expression I had never seen on my mother's face during 4 decades of living together, a complex mixture of contained satisfaction, growing fear, and especially a calculating coldness that made me feel as if I were seeing a dangerous stranger instead of the woman who had raised me with so much apparent love and dedication. Her aristocratic hands delicately held the crystal glass of imported red wine that Roberto had specially chosen for the occasion, and she took a small sip with the same studied elegance she always demonstrated in social situations, as if watching the agonizing death of my mother-in-law were just another tedious social event she needed to endure with the characteristic dignity of someone who had been raised to never display vulgar emotions in public. It was exactly in this moment of absolute emotional paralysis, while Roberto screamed, asking me to call an ambulance, and Rosa desperately fought against something that was destroying her body from within, that I realized with terrifying clarity that my mother was not surprised by what was happening, was not shocked by the tragedy unfolding before us, because she knew exactly what was happening to Rosa, knew each stage of the poisoning process she was witnessing with barely disguised clinical interest. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes that seemed like 12 hours of prolonged agony, during which I desperately tried to keep Rosa conscious following confused and contradictory instructions that the emergency operator shouted through the phone, while Roberto held his mother's head on his lap and cried with the primitive despair of a child helplessly watching the destruction of the person who gave him life. The paramedics invaded our home with sophisticated medical equipment, instantly transforming our elegant dining room into a medical battlefield where they fought to stabilize Rosa's vital signs that dangerously oscillated between life and death, applying generic antidote injections that seemed to have no effect against the specific poison that ran through her veins like lava, destroying everything in its path. Throughout this chaotic rescue attempt, Helena observed from the living room doorway with that same disturbingly calm expression, occasionally adjusting a strand of gray hair that had escaped from her impeccable hairdo, as if the only thing that bothered her in that entire situation was her potentially disheveled appearance instead of the fact that her daughter-in-law was witnessing her mother-in-law's possible death in her own home. The paramedics carried Rosa on the stretcher through our house while she mumbled incoherent words between spasms of pain that made her entire body contort in ways that seemed to defy normal human anatomy, and Roberto insisted on accompanying her in the ambulance, leaving me alone with Helena in a house that suddenly seemed contaminated by an evil presence that I was only beginning to understand. The silence that followed the departure of the ambulance with its strident sirens was more deafening than any scream, filled only by the ticking of the antique wall clock that Helena had given me as a wedding present, and that now seemed to count the seconds until the moment when I would be forced to confront the terrible truth that was forming in my mind like a black storm approaching the horizon. My mother calmly began collecting the plates from the abandoned table, throwing away the food that no one had touched with the methodical efficiency of someone who was simply cleaning up after a common meal instead of an attempted murder. And it was this bizarrely normal behavior that finally broke my emotional paralysis and forced me to verbalize the unthinkable accusation that was choking in my throat. During my 42 years of existence, I had carefully constructed a life that balanced the complex emotional demands of being simultaneously a devoted daughter and a loving wife, constantly navigating between the contradictory expectations of two strong women who subtly competed for my loyalty through passive, aggressive strategies that I had learned to manage with the patience of an international diplomat mediating conflicts between historically hostile nations. Helena had always been an overly present mother, one of those who consider their children extensions of themselves rather than autonomous individuals with the right to their own lives. And since I married Roberto 15 years ago, she had transformed each family interaction into an undeclared competition about who knew me better, who loved me more, who deserved more of my limited time between professional responsibilities as a human resources manager at a multinational company and the domestic obligations of maintaining a healthy marriage. Rosa, on the other hand, had welcomed me into her son's family with genuinely open arms, without the veiled reservations that characterized Helena's conditional acceptance, treating me from day one as the daughter she never had, with a spontaneous and uncomplicated affection that dramatically contrasted with the controlling and suffocating love that my mother confused with maternal care. The rivalry between them began subtly at our engagement dinner, when Helena made a point of casually mentioning that she knew all my favorite dishes since childhood, while Rosa tried to impress with her family culinary specialties, each trying to establish her territory in my life through competitive demonstrations of intimate knowledge and domestic skills. With the passing of years, the competition gradually escalated from passive, aggressive comments about decoration choices and hypothetical child-rearing methods to more direct confrontations about where we would spend holidays, who would be consulted first about important decisions, and mainly about which one of them had more right to my time and attention during weekends that became emotional battlefields where I desperately tried to satisfy two women who measured my love by the number of hours I spent in their respective homes. Helena developed an unhealthy obsession with proving that Rosa was a negative influence in my life, collecting imaginary evidence that my mother-in-law was trying to distance me from my family of origin, interpreting each of Rosa's affectionate gestures as a calculated attempt to steal the affection she considered exclusively hers by biological right. Helena's accusations against Rosa became progressively more paranoid and irrational over the years, evolving from complaints about excessive seasoning in food to elaborate theories about how my mother-in-law was deliberately trying to manipulate me through strategic kindness and calculated generosity. She began to show up unannounced at dinners I organized with Roberto's family, always with some fabricated emergency that required my immediate attention, and became visibly disturbed when Rosa demonstrated any knowledge about aspects of my life that she considered exclusively her territory, such as work problems I had shared during a casual coffee with my mother-in-law. Helena's jealousy manifested in increasingly creative and destructive ways. From excessively expensive gifts she knew Rosa couldn't match to invented stories about malicious comments my mother-in-law had supposedly made behind my back, always presented with fake maternal concern that barely concealed the malicious satisfaction of planting seeds of discord in my relationship with my husband's family. Rosa, with her genuinely kind and uncomplicated nature, initially didn't notice Helena's veiled hostility, interpreting the acidic comments and passive-aggressive behaviors as simple personality differences that could be overcome with patience and goodwill. She continued trying to include my mother in family activities, sending warm invitations to Sunday lunches and various celebrations, without realizing that each gesture of inclusion was interpreted by Helena as a deliberate provocation, a demonstration of power over the emotional territory she considered exclusively hers. It was only after a particularly embarrassing incident during Roberto's birthday, when Helena pretended to have a dramatic illness exactly at the moment Rosa was giving an emotional speech about how I had transformed her son's life, that my mother-in-law began to understand the depth of the animosity my mother harbored against her, though even then she chose to respond with silent dignity rather than retaliation. During the last 2 years, I noticed worrying changes in Helena's behavior that transcended her usual jealousy and entered genuinely disturbing territory, with displays of possessiveness that bordered on pathological and an unhealthy fixation on proving that she was the only person who truly loved me and deserved my love in return. She began obsessively researching Roberto's family genealogy, looking for any scandal or dark secret she could use to convince me that I had married into an unworthy family. And when she found nothing substantial, She began inventing stories about supposed extramarital affairs and financial problems she claimed to have discovered through reliable sources she could never specifically identify. Helena's erratic behavior forced me to gradually limit her visits and establish more rigid boundaries, which only intensified her paranoia that Rosa was deliberately distancing me from her through sophisticated psychological manipulation, an ironic projection of the very tactics she constantly employed herself. The idea of the anniversary lunch had emerged exactly 1 month before, during a tense conversation with Helena where she cried copiously, claiming that I was abandoning her in favor of my husband's family, that she no longer saw me with the frequency a mother should see her only daughter, and that Rosa was systematically assuming the role that legitimately belonged to her. In a desperate attempt to calm her growing insecurities and prove that I still loved her despite her increasingly toxic behaviors, I promised to organize a special lunch where the two of them could finally spend time together in a controlled and civilized environment. An opportunity for Helena to see that there was no real competition, that there was enough room in my heart to love both women who had played fundamental maternal roles in different phases of my adult life. She accepted the proposal with an enthusiasm that should have alerted me to the danger, insisting on helping with the preparations in a way she had never shown interest before, asking specific details about the menu, about who else would be present, about where each person would sit at the table. Questions that at the time I interpreted as genuine attempts to ensure the event would be perfect. Helena arrived at my house 3 hours before the scheduled time for lunch, carrying several bags with ingredients that she insisted were essential to complement the menu I had planned, including aromatic herbs from her personal garden that she cultivated with obsessive dedication and frequently used to prepare medicinal teas that she forced me to drink during my visits, despite their consistently bitter and unpleasant taste. She monopolized my kitchen with the authority of someone who considered that space a natural extension of her maternal domain, completely reorganizing my utensils and spices while subtly criticizing every aspect of my culinary and decorative choices, from the quality of the olive oil I used to the way I had folded the cloth napkins. Throughout the preparation, she maintained superficial conversation about pleasantries, while her hands worked with surgical precision, seasoning dishes, adjusting flavors, and mainly preparing a special salad that she insisted would be the star of the lunch, using herbs from her garden that she claimed had miraculous digestive properties. I observed with growing discomfort as Helena prepared individual portions of the salad on separate plates, claiming it was more elegant to serve this way instead of a common platter where each person would serve themselves. And I particularly noticed how she spent several minutes arranging the plate that would be served to Rosa, adding extra ingredients that she took from a small vial she kept in her apron pocket, saying they were special seasonings that would enhance the flavor for more refined palates. At the time, I interpreted that extra care as a genuine attempt to impress Rosa with her culinary skills, an extension of the benign competition that had characterized their relationship for years, without imagining I was witnessing the meticulous preparations of a premeditated murder attempt. Helena even insisted on which chair each person should occupy at the table, creating an elaborate mental diagram that ensured Rosa would sit exactly in the place where the specially prepared plate would be served, demonstrating a level of planning that would only make horrible sense in retrospect. When Roberto and Rosa arrived promptly at noon, the table was impeccably arranged with a precision that reflected Helena's growing obsessive-compulsive tendencies. Each piece of cutlery aligned to the millimeter, each glass positioned at the exact angle she considered aesthetically ideal, each plate strategically placed to create what she called perfect visual harmony. Rosa brought a beautiful flower arrangement that she had personally assembled with plants from her own garden, a thoughtful gesture that Helena received with a smile that did not reach her cold eyes, placing the vase in a location where it would not interfere with her own carefully planned decorations. The initial conversation flowed with the forced artificiality of people who are consciously avoiding controversial topics, discussing the unseasonably warm weather, the neighborhood news, Roberto's plans to renovate the main bathroom, any safe subject that would maintain the illusion of normality, while the underlying tension grew like pressure in a pot about to explode. Helena served the appetizer with the ceremony of a priestess performing a sacred ritual, distributing the individual salad plates with precise and deliberate movements, personally ensuring that each person received exactly the plate designated for them, correcting Roberto when he inadvertently tried to take the nearest plate instead of the one she had specifically prepared for him. Rosa effusively praised the presentation and aroma of the fresh herbs, not suspecting she was about to consume her own death sentence disguised as hospitality. While Helena watched with predatory attention every movement my mother-in-law made, each forkful she brought to her mouth, like a scientist observing the results of a carefully controlled experiment. I was too busy serving drinks and trying to keep the conversation flowing to notice the looks my mother was giving Rosa. The way her blue eyes obsessively followed every movement of my mother-in-law, the tension in her shoulders suggesting anxious expectation for something that was about to happen. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came approximately 15 minutes after we started eating, when Rosa discreetly placed her hand on her stomach and slightly frowned, a gesture she tried to disguise by taking a sip of water and continuing to participate in the conversation about Roberto's plans for his next vacation. Helena immediately asked if she was okay, with a concern that sounded excessively eager, leaning forward with poorly disguised interest as Rosa assured her that everything was fine, probably just a passing discomfort due to the day's heat. But the discomfort quickly escalated to something more serious when Rosa began sweating profusely despite the air conditioning being on, small beads of perspiration forming on her forehead as she tried to maintain her composure and not ruin what was supposed to be a special celebration of our wedding anniversary. The progression of symptoms was frighteningly rapid, evolving from gastric discomfort to visible nausea, from nausea to respiratory difficulty, from respiratory difficulty to violent convulsions, all in the space of less than 10 minutes that transformed our festive lunch into a scene of medical horror. Roberto initially tried to minimize the situation, suggesting his mother might be having an allergic reaction to some ingredient. But when Rosa began experiencing involuntary muscle spasms and her eyes rolled back in her head, it became impossible to deny that something much more sinister was happening. It was when she fell from her chair and began convulsing on the floor that Helena's mask of concern finally slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing an expression of primitive triumph that chilled me to the bone. A sick satisfaction she quickly tried to hide behind theatrical exclamations of shock and concern. While the ambulance was taking Rosa and Roberto to the hospital, I confronted Helena with a fury I had never felt before in my entire life, a primordial rage that burned like acid in my veins as I demanded to know what she had done, what poison she had put in Rosa's food, why she had decided to destroy so many lives because of her pathological jealousy and sick possessiveness. She initially tried to deny with performative indignation, claiming to be shocked and hurt, that I could even suggest something so horrendous. But when I threatened to call the police immediately and demand a complete toxicological analysis of the food remains, her facade began to crumble like a papier-mâché mask in the rain. "She was stealing you from me," Helena finally admitted in a voice cold and devoid of any genuine remorse. "That woman was systematically replacing me in your life, making you believe she was a better mother than I was, and I simply couldn't allow that to continue happening." Helena's revelation came with calculated coldness as I was still processing the chaos of seeing Rosa being rushed to the hospital, her words cutting through the silence of our home like sharp blades that shredded any illusion I still maintained about the nature of the relationship between my mother and my mother-in-law. "She was stealing you from me?" Helena repeated with a disturbing conviction that transformed her confession of attempted homicide into a declaration of distorted maternal love, as if poisoning Rosa was an act of legitimate protection instead of a heinous crime motivated by pathological jealousy. The residual smell of the abandoned food on the table still lingered in the air, mixed with the expensive perfume that Helena always wore on special occasions, creating a nauseating combination that would forever make me associate that specific aroma with maternal betrayal and domestic violence disguised as a family lunch. My 2 years of experience dealing with the complex personalities of Helena and Rosa had not prepared me for this moment of confrontation with the brutal truth that my own mother was capable of planning and executing an attempted murder with the same meticulousness she applied to her intricate embroidery and perfectionist flower arrangements. "You need to understand, Julia, that everything I did was out of love." Helena continued with that modulated voice she had perfected during decades of sophisticated emotional manipulation, moving around the room with the studied grace of an aged ballerina who still insisted on executing the same steps she had mastered in her youth. Her penetrating blue eyes, which I had inherited in a softer and less calculating version, remained fixed on me with predatory intensity as she explained her perverse logic as if she were discussing the choice of ingredients for a complex recipe instead of justifying a premeditated murder attempt. "Rosa was systematically replacing me in your life, making you believe she was a better grandmother for your future children, better advisor for your marital problems, better company for your Sunday afternoons that should have been reserved exclusively for me." The way she pronounced Rosa's name, with a mixture of contempt and poorly concealed envy, revealed layers of resentment that had accumulated over 15 years, like toxic sediments at the bottom of an apparently calm lake. The antique clock on the wall, an inheritance from my paternal grandmother that Helena always detested, but never had the courage to throw away, marked 3:17 in the afternoon when I began to understand the full extent of my mother's criminal planning. Every detail of the lunch had been orchestrated with surgical precision, from the insistence on personally preparing the appetizer to the specific distribution of seats at the table, ensuring Rosa received the poisoned dish while maintaining the illusion of impeccable hospitality. Helena had transformed our house into a stage for her crime, using the celebration of our wedding anniversary as a smokescreen for her homicidal intentions. Exploiting my filial trust and Rosa's genuine desire to maintain cordial relations despite the constant provocations she had endured for years with admirable dignity. "How much poison did you put in her food?" I asked with a voice I didn't recognize as my own, a mixture of horror and professional determination I had developed during 2 decades working as a human resources manager, dealing with corporate crises that paled in comparison to this family tragedy. Helena tilted her head slightly, a gesture I had known since childhood, and that always preceded her most calculated confessions, when she decided to reveal partial truths to maintain some control over narratives that threatened to escape her domain. Enough to make her suffer, but not necessarily to kill her. She responded with disturbing clinical precision, as if she had carefully researched lethal dosages and deliberately chosen an amount that would maximize suffering without ensuring immediate death. "I wanted her to feel what I feel every time you choose to spend Christmas at her house instead of mine. Every time you call her first when you have good news. Every time you laugh at her unfunny jokes while rolling your eyes at my stories." The magnitude of preparation involved in the crime began to reveal itself through small details I had ignored in previous weeks. Helena's frequent visits to the municipal library where she claimed to be researching family genealogy. The mysterious purchases at natural product stores she justified as renewed interest in alternative medicine, and especially the sudden enthusiasm in cultivating specific plants in her garden that she insisted had miraculous medicinal properties. Each seemingly innocent action had been a calculated step toward the moment when Rosa would bring to her mouth the poison carefully disguised among aromatic herbs and exotic spices, not suspecting she was consuming her own death sentence prepared by the hands of the woman who smiled politely from across the table. Roberto still hadn't called from the hospital, and the absence of news created a vacuum of anxiety that Helena filled with her elaborate justifications, each word carefully chosen to minimize her moral culpability, while maximizing my feeling of responsibility for having forced this situation through my emotional negligence toward her. If you had been a more attentive daughter, if you had established clear boundaries with Rosa from the beginning, if you had prioritized me as any normal daughter would, none of this would have been necessary, she argued with the distorted logic of someone who had spent months, perhaps years, building an internal narrative that justified any atrocity as legitimate defense of her emotional territory. The way she gesticulated while speaking, with precise and elegant movements that she had perfected during decades of presentations in social clubs and charity events, created a disturbing cognitive dissonance between the sophistication of her presentation and the barbarity of her crime. My mind began to obsessively revisit every interaction between Helena and Rosa during the last few months, looking for signs I should have noticed, moments when I could have intervened to prevent this tragedy. Roberto's birthday dinner 3 months ago, when Helena had insisted on serving a special dish for Rosa that she ended up not eating because she had a cold. Had it been a previous attempt? The family Easter gathering when Helena became visibly irritated because Rosa had brought the same dish as her, resulting in acidic comments about lack of originality and pathetic attempts at competition. Were they signs of an escalation toward violence? Each memory reconfigured itself under the new light of this revelation, transforming moments I had interpreted as benign jealousy into evidence of a dangerous obsession that had culminated in attempted murder. "Are you going to report me to the police?" Helena asked with disconcerting calmness, sitting in the red velvet armchair that had always been her unofficial throne in our living room, from which she presided over family meetings and dispensed judgments on all aspects of our lives. The question carried no fear or regret, only calculating curiosity about the practical consequences of her actions, as if she were evaluating the pros and cons of a business decision instead of facing the possibility of imprisonment for attempted murder. Because if you do, you need to understand that you will be destroying our family, staining our name in the community, and most importantly, choosing a stranger over your own mother. The emotional manipulation was so familiar, so deeply ingrained in our relationship, that for an absurd moment I caught myself considering her words, before remembering that she had just confessed to poisoning my mother-in-law. The sound of my cell phone vibrating on the coffee table temporarily broke the silent confrontation between us, and I saw Roberto's name appear on the screen with a photo of him and Rosa taken last Christmas, both genuinely smiling in a display of family affection that now seemed tragically ironic. Helena observed as I answered, her eyes following each micro-expression on my face, while Roberto updated me on Rosa's condition with a voice choked by tears he was trying to control. The doctors managed to stabilize her, but she's in critical condition, he said. And I could hear the sound of hospital machines in the background, the mechanical rhythm of devices keeping Rosa alive while her body fought against the poison that my mother had administered with the same precision with which she prepared her gourmet dishes to impress important guests. The doctor said it looks like poisoning by plant alkaloids, Roberto continued, unaware he was providing me with evidence that confirmed the premeditated nature of Helena's crime. They're running tests to identify the exact substance, but they said whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. The dose was calculated to cause maximum damage without leaving obvious traces. Helena maintained her impassive expression as I mentally repeated Roberto's words, but I noticed a subtle tension in her shoulders, an involuntary recognition that her attempt to appear amateurish had failed, and the doctors had identified the sophistication of her method. The woman who had always prided herself on her superior intelligence and refined education had left her signature on the crime through the very meticulousness she considered her greatest virtue. I hung up the phone with the promise to go to the hospital as soon as possible, though we both knew there were urgent matters to resolve before I could leave Helena alone with her poisonous plants and her apparently absent conscience. Rosa is alive, I announced, carefully observing her reaction to the news that her murder attempt had failed, at least temporarily. For a fraction of a second, I saw something pass through Helena's eyes, not relief or remorse, but frustration, as if a carefully planned project had gone wrong due to technical failure rather than divine or medical intervention. The doctors know it was deliberate poisoning, Helena. They're going to call the police, they're going to investigate, they're going to trace the origin of the poison to your special plants that you cultivate so carefully in your garden. The transformation in Helena's behavior was instant and dramatic, shifting from confident predator to persecuted victim, with the fluidity of a veteran actress changing character. Tears began to form in her blue eyes, not the genuine tears of remorse or fear, but the carefully calibrated performance she had perfected during decades of emotional manipulation. Julia, my dear daughter, you cannot allow them to arrest me, she begged, rising from the armchair and approaching me with arms outstretched in a pantomime of maternal vulnerability. Think of the scandal. Think of what they'll say about our family. Think about how this will affect your career, your marriage, your reputation in the community. We can say it was an accident, an allergic reaction, anything but the truth that would destroy everything we've built together. The word together echoed in the room with bitter irony, because Helena had never really built anything with me. She had built around me, upon me, through me, using my existence as an extension of her own identity, instead of recognizing my autonomy as a separate person with my own rights and relationships. Each of my achievements had been appropriated as her achievement, each failure interpreted as a reflection of her shortcomings as a mother, each independent choice seen as personal betrayal requiring emotional retribution. Rosa had committed the unforgivable crime of offering me unconditional love without the attached strings of manipulation and control that characterized Helena's maternal love, and for this she had become the target of an elimination attempt as calculated as any political assassination. How long did you plan this for? I asked, maintaining physical distance as Helena tried to approach, her predatory movements poorly disguised by the performance of fragility. Weeks? Months? Since when did you decide that Rosa needed to die for you to maintain your dominion over my life? The question seemed to surprise her momentarily, as if she hadn't expected that I could see through her layers of emotional justification to perceive the cold premeditation behind the crime. It wasn't a decision. It was a natural evolution of intolerable circumstances, she answered, temporarily abandoning the victim pose to reveal the strategist behind the mask. Each time Rosa overstepped boundaries, each time she meddled where she wasn't called, each time you chose her advice over mine, the idea grew like an inevitable seed. The botanical metaphor didn't go unnoticed, considering that Helena had literally cultivated the tools of her crime in her own garden, watering and nurturing toxic plants with the same care she claimed to have dedicated to my upbringing. Did you research different poisons? Test dosages? Practice how to administer them without raising suspicions? I pressed, needing to understand the full extent of the premeditation to process the reality that my mother was capable of meticulous homicidal planning. Helena straightened her posture, regaining something of her aristocratic composure, and for a moment I saw the true woman behind decades of maternal performance, calculating, relentless, and completely convinced of her own moral superiority, even while confessing attempted murder. "I did what any mother would do to protect her offspring," she declared with conviction bordering on the messianic, as if she were channeling some primordial maternal force that justified any atrocity in the name of filial love. Rosa was a threat to our bond, a parasite that was sucking the energy that should flow exclusively between us. Every laugh you shared with her was a laugh stolen from me. Every secret entrusted to her was a betrayal of our sacred mother-daughter bond. The pathology of her logic was simultaneously fascinating and terrifying, revealing a mind that had constructed an alternative moral universe where attempted homicide was recontextualized as an act of love and protection. My phone vibrated again, this time with a message from Detective Ferreira, whom Roberto had contacted from the hospital. "Ms. Julia, we need to talk urgently about the incident at lunch. I'm on my way to your residence." The reality that the police were coming transformed the atmosphere of the room, and I saw genuine panic begin to penetrate Helena's armor of control. "You called the police?" she asked with genuine incredulity, as if the possibility of legal consequences had never really crossed her mind during all the planning of the crime. "Roberto called, as any normal person would do when their mother is dying from poisoning," I replied, watching as she processed the information that her perfect crime was about to become very public and very real. "You need to help me," Helena said, changing tactics with the agility of an emotional chameleon. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding, that the herbs were contaminated, that it was a terrible accident. You are my daughter, my blood, my continuation in this world. You cannot allow them to take me to prison like a common criminal." The irony of her considering herself above common criminals while having committed one of the most heinous crimes possible, trying to kill someone who trusted her, demonstrated a disconnection from reality that transcended mere narcissism and entered the territory of sociopathy. "Think about everything I sacrificed for you," she continued, initiating a familiar litany of supposed sacrifices that had actually been choices she made to maintain control over my life. "I gave up working to raise you," she began, conveniently omitting that it had been her choice because she couldn't bear the idea of someone else influencing my development. "I dedicated every moment of my life to your well-being," she continued, not mentioning that this dedication had been suffocating and controlling, preventing me from developing independence well into adulthood. "I protected you from all the dangers of the world," she concluded, apparently not realizing the irony that she had become the greatest danger in my life by trying to murder my mother-in-law during a family celebration. Each supposed sacrifice had been an investment in control, each act of protection an invisible fence keeping me within her emotional domain. The sound of approaching sirens broke her self-justifying monologue, and for the first time since her initial confession, I saw genuine fear in Helena's eyes. Not fear of the legal or moral consequences of her actions, but fear of losing control of the narrative, of being exposed as the vengeful and possessive woman who had tried to kill an imaginary rival instead of the dedicated and misunderstood mother she believed herself to be. "Julia, please. Don't let them take me," she begged, kneeling in a demonstration of desperation that would have been moving if I didn't know that every gesture had been calculated for maximum emotional impact. "We can resolve this as a family. We can find a solution that protects all of us." "There is no us in this situation, Helena," I replied, using her name instead of mother for the first time in our conversation, establishing a psychological distance necessary to survive what was coming. "There is you who committed attempted homicide, Rosa, who is fighting for her life in a hospital, Roberto, who is watching his mother die, and me, who needs to decide whether to protect a criminal or seek justice for an innocent victim." The brutal clarity of my words finally seemed to penetrate her bubble of self-justification, and for a moment I saw the mask fall completely, revealing not the mother I thought I knew, but a dangerous stranger who had lived in my life disguised as maternal love. The doorbell rang with official authority, and through the window I could see Detective Ferreira accompanied by 2 uniformed officers, their presence transforming our home from a symbol of family success into a crime scene. Helena rose with forced dignity, adjusting her navy blue dress and running her hands through her gray hair as if preparing for a social reception instead of an arrest. "Remember, Julia, that blood is thicker than water," she said in a cold voice, the maternal performance finally abandoned in favor of a thinly veiled threat. The choices you make now will define what kind of daughter you really are. And the choices you made defined what kind of mother you really are, I replied, walking toward the door to receive the officers. Each step toward the door was a step away from the woman who had raised me, and toward a painful but necessary truth. That maternal love can be toxic, that blood ties can be hanging ropes, and that sometimes the only way to protect the people we love is by exposing those who claim to love us while committing atrocities in our name. The weight of the decision I was about to make. Turning my own mother into the police or trying to cover up an attempted homicide should have been paralyzing, but the image of Rosa convulsing on the floor of our dining room had crystallized my resolution with diamond-like clarity. When I opened the door to Detective Ferreira, a 48-year-old woman with observant green eyes that had seen decades of domestic tragedies, I felt Helena position herself behind me like a predatory shadow, waiting for the opportunity to regain control of the situation. Detective Ferreira, thank you for coming so quickly, I said, my professional voice taking control while my emotional mind screamed in conflict. My mother has something important to tell you about what happened during lunch. The words came out with a firmness that surprised even myself, immediately establishing that I would not be complicit in Helena's crime or in any attempt to cover it up. Helena stepped forward, and for an absurd moment I thought she was going to voluntarily confess, take responsibility for her actions with the same dignity she applied to all aspects of her public life. Instead, she began an elaborate performance of the concerned hostess, inviting the officers inside while expressing deep concern for Rosa and confusion about how such a tragedy could have happened in her presence. It was all so sudden and inexplicable, she said with conviction that would have been convincing if I hadn't heard her confession minutes before. We were having a wonderful lunch, celebrating my daughter's wedding anniversary, when Rosa suddenly began to feel ill. The ease with which Helena lied, transforming premeditated attempted homicide into an inexplicable tragedy, confirmed what I was only beginning to accept, that I had lived 42 years with a woman I didn't truly know, who had constructed an elaborate maternal persona while hiding a nature capable of calculated violence when her interests were threatened. Detective Ferreira observed Helena with professional attention, her eyes recording every gesture, every vocal inflection, every attempt to control the narrative. Ms. Helena, we need to talk about the specific circumstances of the incident, she said with calm authority that cut through Helena's attempts to maintain superficial social conversation. Of course, Detective, anything to help our dear Rosa, Helena responded, the hypocrisy of her words creating a cognitive dissonance that made me feel nauseous. How could she express concern for the woman she had tried to kill less than 2 hours before? The answer lay in the same capacity for compartmentalization that had allowed her to plan the crime while maintaining the facade of dedicated mother and loving potential grandmother. Perhaps we can talk in the kitchen, Helena suggested, trying to direct the investigation to territory she controlled, where she could show the innocent ingredients and hide the lethal herbs she had used. Actually, Ms. Helena, we need you to accompany us to the police station to give a formal statement, Detective Ferreira announced, and the impact of the words was visible in Helena's body, a sudden rigidity that betrayed her growing panic. Is that really necessary? Can I help more by being here, available for any questions? She tried to negotiate, but the detective had already signaled for the officers to position themselves strategically, blocking any potential escape route. The reality that she was about to be taken for formal questioning began to penetrate her armor of denial, and I saw the exact moment when Helena understood that her perfect crime had become her perfect nightmare. Detective Ferreira, before you take my mother, I need to inform you of something crucial about what happened here today, I declared with a firm voice, observing genuine panic take over Helena's blue eyes as she realized I was about to reveal her confession. The detective turned to me with renewed attention, her observant green eyes registering the palpable tension between mother and daughter, the distorted family dynamics that were about to explode into criminal revelations. My mother confessed to deliberately poisoning my mother-in-law with toxic herbs from her garden, specifically prepared in the dish she served to Rosa during lunch. The words came out with crystal clarity, each syllable a hammer blow destroying decades of misguided family loyalty in favor of the justice necessary for an innocent victim. Helena dramatically paled, her aged fair skin becoming almost translucent as she processed the ultimate betrayal. Her own daughter choosing truth over blood, justice over family complicity. "Julia, what are you doing?" she whispered in a strangled voice. completely abandoning any pretense of innocence in the face of my unequivocal statement. How can you do this to me, your own mother? After everything we've shared, all the years of love and dedication, the emotional manipulation continued even in the face of complete exposure, as if decades of psychological conditioning could overcome the brutal reality that she had attempted to murder Rosa out of pathological jealousy. Detective Ferreira immediately signaled to the officers, who positioned themselves strategically around Helena as she began to retreat toward the hallway, her movements betraying the primitive flight instinct that contradicted her usual pose of aristocratic dignity. "Mrs. Helena Silva, you are being detained under suspicion of attempted qualified homicide," the detective announced with professional authority, removing the handcuffs from her belt while cautiously approaching my mother. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." The metallic sound of the handcuffs being prepared echoed through the room like a funeral bell announcing the definitive end of the life Helena had built on foundations of control and manipulation. "This is absurd, a terrible misunderstanding," Helena protested, attempting one last performance of wronged indignation. But her voice trembled with the knowledge that the game was over. "My daughter is confused, emotionally shaken by Rosa's accident. She doesn't know what she's saying." The desperate attempt to discredit me revealed how deeply she had internalized her own lies, creating an alternative reality where attempted homicide could be recontextualized as a misunderstanding if she simply denied it with enough conviction. But the officers had already seen too much to be influenced by theatrical performances, and they began to approach with professional determination. That's when Helena did something I had never witnessed in 42 years. She ran. With surprising agility for her 67 years, she violently pushed one of the officers and darted toward the kitchen, probably seeking to destroy evidence, or perhaps looking for an escape route through the back of the house. The chaos that followed was simultaneously shocking and pathetic. My refined mother, who had always prided herself on her impeccable composure, fleeing like a common criminal while officers pursued her through the house that had been the stage for so many seemingly civilized family gatherings. The sound of breaking dishes echoed from the kitchen, followed by shouts and the unmistakable noise of physical struggle. I ran after the officers, arriving in time to see Helena being immobilized on the kitchen floor. Her navy blue dress stained with remains of the poisoned salad she had knocked over in her frantic attempt to destroy evidence. Her gray hair, always perfectly arranged, was in complete disarray, and for the first time in my life, I saw my mother completely devoid of the mask of control she had worn as emotional armor for decades. "You've destroyed everything," she screamed at me as the officers lifted her up and finally managed to handcuff her. "Destroyed our family, our name, our future, because of a stranger who isn't even your blood." The accusation revealed the distorted hierarchy of values that had allowed her to justify attempted homicide. For Helena, blood ties superseded basic morality, family loyalty transcended criminal justice, and protecting the family reputation was more important than protecting innocent lives. As they escorted her out of the house, Helena passed by me with eyes burning with a mixture of hatred, betrayal, and disbelief. "You will regret this for the rest of your life," she hissed, her voice carrying venom more lethal than any herb from her garden. "When Rosa dies, because she will die, and when you're alone without mother or mother-in-law, you'll remember that you chose a stranger over your own blood." The maternal curse was her farewell, words calculated to plant seeds of guilt that she hoped would blossom into future regret. Detective Ferreira remained in the house after Helena was taken away, coordinating the forensic team that arrived to collect evidence. The food remains, the herbs from the garden, the suspicious vials Helena kept in the kitchen. "Mrs. Julia, I know this must be extremely difficult," she said with genuine professional compassion. "But you did the right thing. How many victims of domestic violence suffer in silence because the family chooses to protect the aggressor instead of the victim?" Her words offered necessary validation, but did not diminish the emotional weight of having turned my own mother over to justice. My phone rang. It was Roberto from the hospital. "Julia, Rosa has awakened," he said with a voice choked by relief and exhaustion. "The doctors say she will survive, but it was a close call. They identified the poison, a combination of plant alkaloids that would have been fatal if we hadn't reached the hospital when we did. The news that Rosa would survive should have brought pure relief, but it was tainted by the reality that my mother had come dangerously close to committing successful murder. "Roberto, I need to tell you something terrible," I began, preparing myself to destroy any illusion he still maintained about Helena, as a benign, if difficult, maternal figure. Helena confessed. She deliberately poisoned Rosa. The police just took her away. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that I thought the call had dropped, until I heard Roberto take a deep breath, processing the magnitude of the betrayal that had occurred under the guise of a family lunch. In the weeks following Helena's arrest, our house transformed into the epicenter of a scandal that shook our entire community. Neighbors who had admired Helena as a pillar of respectability now whispered about the signs they should have noticed. Family friends divided between those who couldn't believe that the elegant Helena would be capable of such atrocity and those who confessed to always having perceived something disturbing beneath her polished facade. The local media covered the case with morbid fascination. Mother attempts to poison daughter in law out of jealousy became the sensationalist headline that reduced our complex family tragedy to public entertainment. Rosa spent 3 weeks in the hospital, slowly recovering from the damage caused by the poison that Helena had administered with almost lethal precision. During this period, I developed a routine of daily visits, sitting beside her bed while she slept, holding her hand and silently apologizing for not having realized the danger my own mother posed. When she finally had the strength to talk, Rosa demonstrated a capacity for forgiveness that transcended normal human understanding. "It's not your fault, dear," she said in a still, weak voice. "Helena is sick. Sick in a way that none of us realized in time." Helena's trial began 4 months after the incident, in a courtroom crowded with onlookers eager for sordid details of an attempted homicide that violated all social conventions about appropriate family behavior. Helena entered the courtroom as if she were still the respectable matriarch she believed herself to be, impeccably dressed in a gray suit she had purchased specifically for the occasion, her gray hair perfectly arranged by a hairdresser she had convinced to visit her in prison. But the illusion of control was unraveling in her eyes. There was a wild, almost manic gleam that revealed how much incarceration had corroded her already fragile sanity. When I was called to testify, Helena fixed me with a gaze that alternated between desperate pleading and pure hatred. I reported her confession with clinical clarity, each detail of the meticulous planning, each distorted justification she had offered for the attempted murder. My mother believed Rosa was stealing my affection, I testified, my voice echoing through the silent courtroom. She viewed any display of affection between me and my mother in law as a personal betrayal that deserved extreme punishment. Helena's defense attorney tried to argue temporary insanity, presenting a psychiatrist who testified about narcissistic personality disorder and possible psychosis induced by pathological jealousy. But the prosecution presented devastating evidence of premeditation. Library records showing Helena had researched plant poisons, receipts for purchases of specific toxic plants, and most importantly, a diary that had been discovered during a house search, where she had documented her plans with disturbing details, including dosage calculations and observations about Rosa's eating habits. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Rosa was called to testify. Still fragile from her near-death experience, she had to be helped to walk to the witness stand. Helena watched with morbid fascination as the woman she had tried to kill described the moments of agony when the poison began to take effect. I felt as if my body was on fire from the inside, Rosa reported in a trembling voice. Each breath was a battle, each heartbeat an explosion of pain. But then Rosa did something extraordinary. She turned directly to Helena and said, "I forgive you. Not for you, but for me, for Julia, for our family. Carrying hatred would be letting your poison continue to destroy me." Helena appeared physically struck by the words, her rigid body trembling with emotion she couldn't process. The woman she had tried to eliminate was offering the forgiveness that her own daughter could not give. During her own testimony, Helena attempted one last elaborate manipulation, painting herself as a victim of excessive and misunderstood maternal love. "Everything I did was out of love for my daughter," she declared, theatrical tears streaming down her face. "Rosa was destroying our sacred bond, turning Julia against me. A mother has the right to protect her relationship with her child." But her words fell on deaf ears. The jury saw through the performance, recognizing the dangerous pathology behind the emotional justifications. The verdict came after only 3 hours of deliberation: guilty of aggravated attempted murder. Helena was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with possibility of parole after 8 years for good behavior. When the sentence was read, she turned to me one last time, her piercing blue eyes filled with a silent promise that this wasn't over, that her blood running in my veins would be my eternal curse. "Father Antonio, our spiritual counselor from the local parish, visited me repeatedly in the months that followed, trying to help me process the complex guilt of having been instrumental in my own mother's conviction. Forgiveness doesn't mean accepting the unacceptable, he advised me with his gentle wisdom. Sometimes the truest love we can show is allowing someone to face the consequences of their actions, in the hope that it brings eventual redemption. Rosa's recovery was slow but steadfast, each day bringing small victories, being able to eat solid food again, walking without assistance, gradually returning to the activities that gave meaning to her life. Roberto and I created a routine of joint care, alternating responsibilities while navigating the shared trauma of almost losing his mother at the hands of mine. Our marriage, tested by circumstances no marriage vow could have anticipated, emerged stronger, forged in the fire of extreme adversity. Dr. Mendez, the forensic doctor who had analyzed the poison, became a crucial expert witness, not only in the trial, but also in the civil proceedings that followed. Rosa decided not to sue Helena personally, another act of extraordinary grace, but the prosecution pursued full criminal charges. Dr. Mendez explained in fascinating and terrifying technical details how Helena had created a specific lethal mixture, combining alkaloids from different plants in a way that would mask initial symptoms while maximizing internal damage. A year after the incident, I received a letter from Helena from prison. Against my better judgment, I opened it, finding pages of elaborate justifications, accusations of betrayal, and mostly a final attempt to make me feel guilty for having destroyed our family. "One day you will understand what I sacrificed for you," she wrote, "and you will regret choosing strangers over blood." I burned the letter, watching the poisonous words turn to ashes, a necessary symbolic purification. Rosa, surprisingly, began corresponding with Helena in prison, without my initial knowledge. When I discovered it, I was furious and confused. "Why would you do that?" I asked, unable to comprehend how she could have any communication with the woman who had tried to kill her. Rosa looked at me with those warm brown eyes that had seen death up close and chosen life, and said, "Because her hatred is destroying her more than any prison could. Perhaps, by showing that I survived and thrived, I can plant a seed of genuine remorse." Rosa's letters to Helena were studies in radical compassion. She wrote about the garden she was cultivating, without mentioning the irony, about the grandchildren she hoped to have one day, about the beauty of being alive to see another sunrise. Helena initially responded with verbal venom, but gradually, something began to change. The letters became less accusatory, more reflective, as if Rosa's persistent grace was slowly penetrating the armor of justification that Helena had built around her conscience. 3 years passed. Roberto and I had our first daughter, a girl we named Sophia, for wisdom, the quality we hoped she would develop in a world where family love could be both blessing and curse. Rosa became the grandmother she had always dreamed of being, pouring onto Sophia all the love she had accumulated during years of patient waiting. Sometimes, watching her with my daughter, I wondered about Helena in prison, if she comprehended what she had lost through her own actions. Detective Ferreira maintained occasional contact, informing me about Helena's behavior in prison. "She has become a model prisoner," he reported during a coffee 2 years after the conviction. "She participates in therapy groups, works in the prison library. Some say she has changed, others think it's just another performance." The ambiguity was disturbing. Helena was a master of performances, but was it possible that the forced confrontation with her actions had catalyzed genuine change? 5 years after the incident, I received notification that Helena was requesting early parole for good behavior. The hearing required my presence as a family victim, forcing me to confront feelings I had tried to bury under layers of reconstructed life. Rosa insisted on accompanying me, her presence a physical reminder that survival and forgiveness were possible even after an attempted annihilation. Helena at the parole hearing was unrecognizable, not physically, although prison had taken its toll, but in demeanor. The aristocratic arrogance had disappeared, replaced by something that could be genuine humility or the ultimate performance. "I understand if my daughter can never forgive me," she told the parole board. "I tried to destroy an innocent woman's life out of sick jealousy. I don't deserve freedom, but I promise that if released, I will dedicate my life to making amends." When my turn came to speak, I looked at Helena, the woman who gave me life and nearly took another's, and said, "I neither oppose nor support parole. I leave it in the hands of justice and time to determine if Helena has truly changed or is merely presenting another elaborate performance." It was the most neutrality I could offer, a compromise between justice and the remote possibility of redemption. Parole was denied. but Helena would be eligible again in 2 years. Rosa, surprisingly, continued writing, her letters like persistent drops of water on stone, possibly eroding the hardness that had allowed Helena to contemplate homicide. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption, Rosa told me when I questioned her persistence. Not for them, but because withholding that possibility makes us no better than those who hurt us. 7 years have passed since that fateful Sunday. Sophia grew up surrounded by Rosa's love, who became not just a grandmother, but mentor, friend, confidant. Sometimes Sophia would ask about the other grandmother, the one absent from family photos. We explained in age-appropriate terms that some people make choices that distance them from family, but that true love sometimes means letting people go to protect those who remain. Helena was finally released after serving 8 years. She didn't try to contact me directly, respecting the restraining order that remained in effect. But I learned through mutual acquaintances that she had moved to a distant town, volunteered at a community garden, the irony wasn't lost, and regularly attended support groups for people with personality disorders. One day, 10 years after the poisoning, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a photo album, images of me from infancy to adulthood, many I had never seen before, and a single letter. These memories belong to you. They represent the part of our relationship that was real, before my sick jealousy destroyed everything. I don't ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. Just know that the mother in those old photos loved you, even if in a distorted and ultimately destructive way. Live well. H. I showed the letter to Rosa, who had become my true mother figure through choice rather than biology. She read it carefully, then said, "Holding resentment is like her trying to poison me again, except this time I would be the one administering the poison to myself. I choose not to give her that power." Her wisdom, born of survival and transcendence, became my guide for navigating the complexities of a world where maternal love could manifest as attempted homicide. Roberto and I had a second child, a boy we named Gabriel, for strength. Rosa was there for his birth, holding my hand as the mother Helena never knew how to be, present without being suffocating, loving without being possessive, protective without being controlling. Watching her with my children, I finally understood that true family isn't defined by blood, but by daily choices to love, protect, and nurture without destroying autonomy or identity. Years passed. Helena remained a present absence, a ghost at the edges of our reconstructed family life. I learned she had written a book about her experience, When Love Becomes Poison, donating all proceeds to victims of domestic violence. Some saw this as a genuine attempt at reparation, others as another elaborate performance. I chose not to read it, not out of anger, but for protection. Some stories don't need to be revisited. Rosa lived to see her grandchildren grow up, to dance at Sophia's wedding, to hold her first great-grandchild. She died peacefully at 84, surrounded by family she had nurtured with unconditional love. At her funeral, I read a letter she had left to be opened after her death. I survived Helena's poison not by luck, but by purpose. I needed to show that true love survives even attempts at annihilation. Thank you for choosing justice over blood, truth over misguided loyalty. You saved not only my life, but the soul of our family. Helena died 2 years after Rosa, alone in a small apartment discovered days later by concerned neighbors. Among her belongings, they found thousands of pages of diaries detailing her struggle with what she finally recognized as severe narcissistic personality disorder and sociopathic traits. The final pages contained something approaching genuine remorse. I tried to kill the only person who showed me true grace. Rosa forgave me when I didn't deserve it, continued writing to me when I only responded with venom. If there is poetic justice, it's that the woman I tried to eliminate lived a full life while I died slowly from my own internal poison. I didn't go to Helena's funeral. Instead, I took my children to visit Rosa's grave, where we planted flowers from the garden she had cultivated with such love. I told them in age-appropriate terms about choices and consequences, about how true love protects rather than possesses, about how sometimes the person who gives us biological life is not capable of giving us emotional life, and that's okay. My story is not about forgiveness. Some actions transcend conventional forgiveness. It's about survival, about choosing to protect the vulnerable even when it means exposing the powerful, about recognizing that blood ties don't justify criminal complicity. Helena tried to force me to choose between her and Rosa, between blood and justice, between family loyalty and basic morality. She never understood that forcing such a choice was already her defeat. Today, 20 years after that fateful Sunday, I can finally articulate the most important lesson. Healthy maternal love wants children to fly, even if they fly away. Toxic maternal love breaks wings to ensure that children can never leave. Helena broke her own wings the moment she decided that eliminating Rosa was preferable to sharing my affection. She created her own prison long before physical walls confined her. Rosa taught me that surviving is not just about continuing to breathe after trauma. It's about choosing love over fear, grace over revenge, life over the little deaths that hatred brings. She transformed attempted homicide into an opportunity to demonstrate superhuman resilience. Each day she lived fully was testimony against Helena's poisonous ideology that love is possession and family is property. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of dawn, I still process the trauma of discovering that my mother was capable of premeditated homicide. But then I remember Rosa holding my newborn daughter, her warm brown eyes full of promise that the cycle of toxicity had been broken. Helena tried to poison more than food. She tried to poison the very concept of family love. Her failure was our liberation. This is my truth. I saved Rosa's life by exposing Helena's crime. But Rosa saved my soul by showing that survival with grace is the ultimate revenge against those who try to destroy us. Helena remains an example of what happens when we confuse control with care, possession with protection, jealousy with love. She died never fully understanding that she tried to kill exactly the person who could have taught her how to love without destroying. Did you like Julia's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you right here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.